You felt bored today, maybe more than once, waiting in line, sitting through a meeting, scrolling because you didn't know what else to do with your hands. Your ancestors never felt that. Not because their lives were more exciting, most days they weren't. Because the feeling you call boredom, the specific, itchy, restless discomfort of having nothing to do, may not have existed for them at all. That sounds impossible. So let's look at why researchers actually believe it. Start with language, because language is usually the first clue that something is missing. Anthropologists and linguists who have spent years living with hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza in Tanzania, the Juhwansi of the Kalahari, groups in the Amazon, have made the same observation independently. In many of these languages, there is no word that translates directly to boredom. Not a rare word, not an old word that fell out of use, no word at all. That doesn't mean these cultures were free of every uncomfortable feeling. They have words for tired, words for sad, words for restless in the sense of wanting to move your body. What they don't have is a word for the specific mental state of unoccupied time feeling unbearable, which raises an obvious question. If they weren't bored, what were they instead? The answer researchers keep landing on is simpler than you'd expect. Comfortable. Doing nothing for most of human history wasn't a problem to be solved. It was just a normal part of the day. Remember, hunter-gatherer groups worked roughly 15 hours a week. That leaves enormous stretches of unstructured time. Sitting, watching, half listening to conversation, watching children play. Anthropologists who've spent time in these communities describe long silences that don't feel awkward, and long stretches of stillness that don't feel like waiting for something better to start. Now here's something that surprised historians when they went looking for it. The word boredom itself is shockingly young. It doesn't show up in the English language in its modern sense until the 1850s, first appearing in print in Charles Dickens's novel Bleak House. Before that, the concept barely had a name at all. Older languages had words for tedium, for weariness, for melancholy, but not for this specific restless, itchy craving for something, anything, to happen. Historians who study the period noticed something else. The word appeared right around the time factory work, rigid clock-based schedules, and repetitive industrial labor were reshaping how people spent their days. For the first time in history, large numbers of people were doing the same small task, at the same forced pace, for the same fixed hours, day after day. Boredom, some historians argue, wasn't discovered. It was manufactured, a byproduct of a very specific, very modern way of organizing time. In our world, that same stillness triggers something closer to distress. In 2014, a set of psychology studies made this painfully clear. Researchers gave participants nothing to do but sit alone in a room for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, just their thoughts. The twist was, participants had the option to give themselves a mild electric shock if they wanted something. Anything to do instead of just sitting there. A significant number of people shocked themselves, some more than once. Multiple times, in fact, purely to avoid sitting with their own unoccupied mind for a quarter of an hour. Think about that. Modern humans, given 15 minutes of silence, some of them chose pain over stillness. So, what actually changed? Why does a hunter-gatherer sit comfortably by a fire doing nothing, while a modern human in a waiting room reaches for a phone within seconds? Psychologists who study attention think the answer comes down to something called stimulation baseline, the amount of novelty and input your brain has been trained to expect as normal. For most of human history, that baseline was low. A day might bring a new track in the dirt, a shift in the weather, an unfamiliar bird call, a story around the fire you hadn't heard before. Novelty arrived slowly in small doses, spaced out across hours. Your brain calibrated to that pace. Stillness didn't feel like deprivation because there wasn't much to be deprived of in the first place. Now compare that to a single modern minute. A notification, a headline, a short video that cuts to a new shot every 2 seconds. Modern media doesn't just entertain you, it retrains your baseline. Your brain starts expecting a constant, rapid stream of novelty, and once that becomes the new normal, ordinary, unstructured time starts to feel, by comparison, unbearably empty. Researchers have a name for this. They call it the boredom gap. The widening distance between how much stimulation your environment is used to providing and how much stimulation is actually present in a given moment. The bigger that gap, the more intense the boredom. 10,000 years ago, that gap barely existed. Environments were mostly the same, moment to moment. There was nothing to compare stillness against. Today, the gap is enormous, and it keeps growing every time a new app, a new platform, a new format promises a slightly faster hit of novelty than the last one. There's data that shows just how fast this shift has happened in a single lifetime. A widely cited study on attention found that the average time someone spent focused on a single screen before switching to another task dropped from around 2.5 minutes in the early 2000s to under 47 seconds today. That's not a small decline. That's an attention span cut down to roughly a fifth of what it was in about 2 decades. Your ancestors' baseline took hundreds of thousands of years to calibrate. Ours has been rewritten in less than 1 generation. Here's the part that should really bother you. Some psychologists argue that boredom isn't actually about having nothing to do. It's a warning signal, an internal alarm telling you that your current stimulation level doesn't match what your brain has learned to expect. Which means every time you reach for your phone, the instant a room goes quiet, you're not weak and you're not broken. You're responding exactly the way a brain calibrated by hours of rapid-fire stimulation is supposed to respond. Ancient humans simply never built up that calibration in the first place, and there's a cost to constantly closing that gap the moment it opens. Neuroscientists have found that idle, unstimulated time, the exact thing your brain now treats as an emergency, is when some of the most important cognitive work happens. Memory consolidation, creative problem solving, the quiet mental sorting that turns scattered experience into insight. Several studies on mind wandering have found that people generate their best, most original ideas not while actively focused on a task, but during unstructured downtime, the kind of stillness a hunter-gatherer might have spent an entire afternoon inside without a second thought. We've built a world that treats that stillness as a problem to be eliminated as fast as possible. And in eliminating it, we may be quietly cutting ourselves off from a mental process our ancestors had constant, effortless access to. So the next time you feel that itch, the restless need to check something, open something, scroll past something, it's worth pausing on what that feeling actually is. Not a flaw in you. A mismatch between a brain built for a slow, low-novelty world and a life lived inside the fastest, highest novelty environment humans have ever created. Your ancestors sat by fires for hours, watching flames, saying nothing, and it never once occurred to them that something was missing. They didn't have a word for what you feel right now because they never needed one. We built machines that can entertain us every second of every day, and somehow, we're more bored than they ever were.